Have you ever come across one of those ideas that's just so out there you think, no way, this can't be true?
Oh, yeah. I know what you know.
Well, that's what it was like for me when I first started reading this academic paper.
Really?
Yeah, it's called Zephaniah, Trump, and the Prophecy of National Restoration. It's from March 9th, 2025.
Okay.
And get this, it's co-authored by a human and an AI.
Wow. That's a pretty unusual combination.
It really is.
So what's the paper all about?
Well, it asks this really big question. Could an ancient biblical prophecy actually have something to do with a modern political movement? And it looks specifically at connections between the prophet Zephaniah and the actions of former President Trump.
Okay.
Especially Trump's Make America Great Again agenda and his focus on getting American hostages back home.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
Yeah, it is.
So who is this Zephaniah? What did he have to say?
Well, Zephaniah was a prophet back in the 7th century BC in the Kingdom of Judah.
Okay.
And his book in the Bible, it's got all these warnings about God's judgment, but it also talks about hope and restoration for the nation.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's this kind of like two sides to it,
Yeah.
Judgment and then redemption.
Like a falling down and then rising up again.
Exactly.
Which actually kind of fits with the whole idea behind Trump's MAGA movement.
Right. And the paper really focuses in on Zephaniah 3:20.
Okay.
This seems to be like the key verse for their argument.
Okay, what does it say?
It says, "At that time I will bring you back, and at the time I gather you, for I will make you a name and a praise among all the peoples of the earth, when I restore your captives before your eyes, says the Lord."
Yeah, there's a lot in that verse.
Yeah.
It talks about restoring a nation, about being important on the world stage again, even about captives being freed.
That's what really struck me when I first read it.
Really?
Yeah, that image of captives being brought back.
I could see why.
It's so powerful, and the authors connect that directly to Trump's work in bringing American hostages home. So that's just one of 5 main parallels they make between Zephaniah's prophecy and the MAGA movement.
A 5.
5 parallels.
Okay, you gotta tell me more.
All right, so what are these connections they're making?
Well, the first one's all about national restoration and gathering the exiles.
Okay.
They say that Zephaniah's vision of God, bringing his people back and making them strong again, it's similar to Trump's idea of making America strong and proud again.
So like bringing back what was lost. The people, the jobs, that sense of national pride.
Exactly.
It's almost like they're both talking about returning to a time when things were better.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the second parallel, which is national honor and strength.
Okay.
Remember how Zephaniah talks about God making his people a name and a praise among all the peoples of the earth? Well, the authors say that's like the MAGA idea of America being recognized and respected around the world again.
Right, like that America First slogan.
Exactly.
So it's not just about being strong inside the country, it's about showing that strength to the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's about being seen as powerful on the global stage.
Got it.
The third parallel is about redemption after judgment.
Okay.
So Zephaniah's prophecy, it comes after all these warnings about destruction,
Yeah, all right.
but then it offers hope for a fresh start and a return to what's good.
I see.
And the authors link this to the MAGA idea that things had gotten bad in America and that the movement was needed to set things right again.
Like a reset button.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that also fit with how some MAGA supporters see themselves?
How so?
Like as a group that's trying to protect America's true values against people who want to change them.
Yeah, absolutely. And they even connect this to that biblical idea of a remnant.
A remnant.
Yeah. It's like a group of people who survive hard times so they can carry on the true spirit of a nation.
That's really interesting.
It is.
Of all the parallels, this Return of the Captives one really has me curious.
Yeah.
It seems less about ideas and more about actual things that were done.
Right. It's more concrete.
What else did the authors say about it?
Well, they talk about how Zephaniah mentions God restoring captives, and they connect that directly to all the work Trump did to free American hostages overseas.
You mean like his negotiations with North Korea and Iran?
Exactly.
And even with Hamas, right?
Yeah, those are all big news stories.
It really made him look like a strong leader.
Yeah.
Like he was willing to do whatever it took to get his people back.
Exactly.
Almost like a biblical figure leading people out of exile.
That's a good comparison. And that brings us to the last and maybe the most interesting parallel.
Okay, what's that?
It's called a divinely ordained mission.
Okay.
So Zephaniah's prophecy, it's presented as God's plan for the nation. Like God is guiding them back to greatness.
Right.
And the authors connect this to the belief that some people had that Trump's presidency was part of God's plan for America.
Wow, that one really opens up a whole other conversation, doesn't it?
It does.
About how religion and politics mix.
Yeah.
And how people interpret these prophecies.
Right. It's definitely something to think about.
So these 5 parallels are all really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm guessing the paper doesn't stop there.
You're right. They actually go on to look at other historical movements.
Really?
Yeah, ones that have these same themes of national restoration and revival.
You know, when you say it like that, it makes me wonder if this whole idea of a leader bringing a nation back to its former glory.
Yeah.
Isn't that a story that we've heard many times throughout history?
It is.
What other examples did they give?
Well, one that stood out to me was the return from Babylonian exile.
Okay.
They talk about how Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, let the Jews go back to their homeland.
Right. And he's even called a Messiah in the Bible, even though he wasn't Jewish.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting comparison.
It is.
Especially when you think about how some people see Trump as a kind of modern-day Cyrus.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think. What other examples did they give? Well, they talk about the Protestant Reformation, and they compare how the reformers wanted to get rid of corruption in the Catholic Church to the Meiji idea of draining the swamp.
It's like both movements wanted to clean things up and go back to a pure form of their belief system.
Exactly.
Interesting.
What else? Well, they bring up the American Revolution.
Okay.
And they frame it as a story of people breaking free from oppression and creating a new destiny for their nation.
A destiny that many believed was guided by God.
Right. And that connects to a lot of the Meiji rhetoric about American exceptionalism and resisting tyranny.
It's like they're drawing a direct line from the American Revolution to the Meiji movement.
Exactly.
Wow, this is all so fascinating.
It is.
What other historical parallels did they find?
Well, they talked about the creation of the State of Israel in 1948.
Okay.
Which a lot of people saw as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Right, the Jewish people finally returning to their homeland after all their centuries.
Exactly.
And that ties into another connection the paper makes.
What's that?
Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Right. Some people saw that as supporting this big idea of the Jewish people returning to their rightful place.
Yeah, like a modern version of that ancient return from exile.
It's amazing to think about all these patterns repeating throughout history.
It is.
Like echoes of old stories being played out again in our time.
That's really what makes this paper so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not about giving you all the answers or telling you what to think.
Right.
It's about making you ask bigger questions.
Right.
And look for connections you might not have seen before.
And maybe even rethink how we understand both history and what's happening in the world today.
Exactly.
You know, when I started looking into this paper, I have to admit I was pretty skeptical.
I hear ya.
But the more we've talked about it, the more I realize how complex all of this really is.
Yeah.
It's definitely made me question some of my own assumptions and see things in a new light.
That's what happens when you engage with ideas that challenge you.
It's not about always agreeing. It's about opening your mind to new possibilities.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive so far.
It has.
We've talked about the main prophecy from Zephaniah, those 5 key parallels to the MAGA movement,
Right.
and all these thought-provoking connections to other points in history.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It really is. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think we need to go back to Zephaniah and Trump.
Okay.
Look again at those 2 big ideas from Zephaniah 3:20.
You mean about raising a nation to greatness and bringing captives home?
Exactly.
Okay.
And see how those connect to what Trump actually did and the whole Meiji agenda.
Sounds good to me. That's where things really start to get interesting.
They do.
So we're going back to those 2 big ideas from Zephaniah 3.20.
Okay.
Raising a nation to greatness and bringing captives back home.
Right.
And now we're going to see how the authors connect those directly to Trump's actions and the whole MAGA movement.
It is pretty fascinating how they make these connections.
It is.
Especially when you consider the Make America Great Again slogan itself. It wasn't just about economics, right?
No.
It was about this deeper feeling of wanting America to be powerful in the world again.
Right. It was about national pride.
Yeah.
A return to a time when America was seen as the leader.
Exactly.
And that seems to fit with what Zephaniah said about a nation being lifted up and respected by everyone else.
Yeah, it does.
But how does the paper connect that to things Trump actually did?
Well, they point to a lot of different actions.
Like what?
Strengthening national sovereignty.
Go.
Pushing for economic independence.
Yeah.
Even showing off military strength.
Right.
Whether you agreed with those policies or not.
Yeah.
They were all about putting America first, and asserting its power on the world stage.
So it's about strength, right?
Yeah.
Both how strong America is on its own
Right.
and how strong other countries see it.
Exactly.
It's about being the top dog again.
Exactly. And then there's that other powerful theme from Zephaniah.
You mean bringing captives home?
Yeah, this is where the paper gets really specific.
Okay.
Connecting it to all the work Trump did to get American hostages released overseas.
This is the part that really grabbed my attention.
I can see why.
It goes beyond just talking about national greatness.
Right.
It's about concrete things that were done that seem to match up with the prophet's words.
Exactly.
What really stood out to you about these examples?
Well, they point to a lot of high-profile cases,
Okay.
like Trump's talks with North Korea to get American detainees released,
Right.
his efforts to bring hostages home from Iran,
Uh-huh.
even his involvement in getting Americans held by Hamas freed.
Right. Those were all over the news.
They were.
And it really fit with this image of him as a strong leader,
Yeah.
fighting to free Americans held captive.
Like a rescuer.
Exactly, bringing them back from danger.
Yeah, right?
And he really played that up in his speeches, didn't he?
He did.
He always presented himself as this champion for Americans held hostage,
Yeah.
fighting to get them back.
It was a powerful narrative.
It really was.
It almost tapped into this ancient idea of a leader who rescues his people,
Yeah.
who brings them back from exile.
You know, I have to admit, when I first started reading this paper, I was pretty skeptical.
Really?
Yeah, the whole thing just seemed so far out there. Like they were reaching for connections that weren't really there.
Uh-huh.
But the more we talk about it, the more I see how these connections might actually make sense.
I think it's a really thought-provoking paper.
It is.
And that's one of the best things about it.
What do you mean?
It makes you ask questions.
Okay.
It encourages you to look for patterns,
Right.
and it really challenges you to think critically about how we understand history and prophecy.
It's like holding a mirror up to the past and the present
Yeah.
and asking, have we seen this before?
Exactly.
Are we seeing these old stories playing out again today?
Right.
It makes you wonder if there are forces at work shaping our world.
Yeah.
Forces we don't even fully grasp.
It's a really fascinating point.
It is.
And it's important to remember that the paper doesn't give you all the answers.
Right. It doesn't say Trump was a prophet
Exactly.
or that MAGA was like a direct fulfillment of what Zephaniah said.
No. It's more subtle than that.
So if it's not about giving us answers,
Yeah.
what's the point?
I think it's about recognizing how complicated these issues are
Okay.
and how we don't always have all the answers.
Right.
It's about being open to different perspectives
Okay.
and asking ourselves what these connections might tell us about our own beliefs and what we take for granted.
That's a really good point. It's not about being right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's about starting a conversation,
Exactly.
inviting us to look deeper and think about new possibilities.
Right.
It really makes you wonder if these patterns of national restoration and
Yeah.
bringing captives home,
Yeah.
if those really do repeat throughout history,
Right.
what does that tell us about where America is headed?
Yeah. Are we just going to keep going through these cycles of decline and renewal?
Mm.
Or can we learn from these patterns
Yeah.
and find a new way forward?
Those are some huge questions.
They are.
And that leads me to one of the parts of the paper I'm most excited to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
The author's exploration of how these themes have shown up throughout history.
Yes. I was really struck by how they compared Trump to Cyrus the Great.
Okay.
It's not just about how their actions were similar.
Yeah.
It's also about how people have seen them through the lens of prophecy.
That's a great place to start. Let's dive into those historical parallels
Okay.
and see what we can learn from them. All right, so let's talk about these historical echoes.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in this comparison to Cyrus the Great.
Yeah.
I mean, he's actually called a Messiah in the Bible,
He is.
even though he wasn't Jewish.
Right.
It really makes you think about how we define these Messiah figures throughout history,
It does.
especially when people compare them to modern political leaders like Trump.
Yeah, it's a good point. So Cyrus,
Yeah.
he let the Jewish exiles go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple.
Mm-hmm.
He played a huge role in their national restoration.
He did.
He was seen as a liberator.
Right.
Someone who was fulfilling God's plan.
Right.
Even though he wasn't part of their faith.
And the paper suggests that some people see Trump in a similar way as
Yeah.
this figure who,
Yeah.
despite maybe not being perfect,
Right.
was chosen to bring America back to its former glory.
Yeah, it's a bold comparison.
It is.
But I think it highlights the main point of the paper.
Which is.
These themes of national restoration
Mm-hmm.
and divinely ordained missions.
Right.
They've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
They show up again and again throughout history.
It's not just something we're seeing with Trump.
Exactly.
That's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating.
Yeah.
The paper connects these ideas to so many different historical movements.
Right.
Like the Protestant Reformation.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. The Reformers, they wanted to get rid of what they saw as corruption in the Catholic Church and bring Christianity back to its roots.
It's interesting to compare that to the MAGA idea of draining the swamp.
Yeah.
Getting rid of the establishment.
It is. They both seem to be about this desire for purification.
Right.
Going back to a more authentic or ideal state.
And then there's the American Revolution.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The paper talks about it as this story of breaking free from oppression and creating a new destiny for the nation.
One that a lot of people believed was guided by God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can see how that story connects with the MAGA movement.
Yeah.
With its focus on American exceptionalism, sovereignty, and going back to the values of the Founding Fathers.
It's like they're drawing a direct line from the American Revolution to the MAGA movement.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the creation of the State of Israel in 1948.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people saw that as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
It did.
The Jewish people finally returning to their homeland after being scattered for so long.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
It's given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And for our listeners who are feeling that same spark of curiosity, I encourage you to explore further.
Right.
Read Zephaniah's prophecy for yourself.
Okay.
Look into the history of these other movements and the people involved.
Yeah.
There's so much out there to learn.
There is.
And as you go deeper, remember to keep asking questions.
Okay.
Challenge your assumptions.
Right.
And be open to new perspectives.
That's how we grow and learn.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
That's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds engaged.